And now is the time in our service where we take an offering. We know it's for the gifts of all of us. I'm sorry, what did I do wrong with the reading? So sorry.
We can move things around, but it is good to be with you. This reading today is the parable of the Good Samaritan, ancient story, teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. But the version we hear today is as told by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He offered many versions over the year. This one's from 1968. One day a man came to Jesus and he wanted to raise some questions about vital matters of life. At points, the person wanted to trick Jesus and show him that he knew a little more than Jesus knew and threw him off base. And so the person asked, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, that question easily could have ended up in a philosophical and theological debate, King says. But Jesus immediately pulled that question from midair and placed it on a dangerous curve between Jerusalem and Jericho. And Jesus told the story of a certain man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. And at a point on that journey, the man was attacked by robbers who beat him, took his money, and departed, leaving this traveler half dead. And by chance, a certain priest appeared walking along the side of the road, but he left the wounded man to his fate by passing by. A few minutes later, an assistant to the priest approached the scene, but like the priest before, saw the man on the side of the road and passed by. And then finally, a Samaritan appeared, a man of another race than the traveler, a man with whom normally the traveler had no dealing. But the Samaritan saw the wounded man and was moved with compassion and got down from his horse and decided not to be compassionate by proxy, but administered first aid and helped the traveler in need, placing him on his beast, and as scripture says, brought him to an inn and took care of him. King said, Jesus ended saying, this was the good man, this was the great person, because they had a capacity to project the I into thou, to see the holiness in the other, and to be concerned about his sibling. King said, "Who is my neighbor? I do not know his name. My neighbor is anyone whom you prove to be neighborly, anyone lying in need on life's roadside. My neighbor is neither a Jew nor a Gentile, nor a Russian nor an American, neither black or white. My neighbor is a certain traveler, any person lying needy on one of the numerous Jericho roads of life." King says, so Jesus ended up defining a neighbor not by a theological definition or a philosophical explanation, but by life situation. King says, now, we often use our imagination a great deal to try to determine why the priest and the assistant did not stop. At times we say, they were busy going to a church meeting, or they had to go to Jerusalem right away, so they didn't want to be late. At other times we speculate, maybe they were following a religious law that says if you're engaged in certain rituals and ceremonies, you should not touch a human body 24 hours before the ceremony. And every now and again, we begin to wonder, maybe they were not just going down to Jericho to avoid the problem, but maybe to try to organize a Jericho Road Improvement Association. Maybe they wanted to get to the root cause. Maybe they felt it was better to work at that angle than to spend time with one traveler on the side of the road. But King says, I'm going to tell you what my imagination says. It is possible that they were afraid. The Jericho Road is a dangerous road. King says, I remember when Mrs. King and I first went to Jerusalem. We rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as we went on the road, I said to Coretta, I can see why Jesus used this as a setting for the parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's very conducive for ambushing. You start out at Jerusalem, which is about 1,200 feet above sea level, and then you go down toward Jericho. 15 or 20 minutes later, you're over 2,000 feet below sea level. It's a dangerous road. In the days of Jesus, it began to be known as the Bloody Pass. And it's possible that the priest and the assistant looked over at the traveler on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt the traveler on the ground was merely faking and was acting like he had been robbed and hurt in order to seize and hurt them. And so the first question that the priest asked, the first question that the assistant asked was, if I stop to help the traveler, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan came by and reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? And he concluded, that's the question before us tonight, not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to my job? Not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to all the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week? The question is not if I stop to help this traveler in need, what will happen to me? The question is, if I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? That's the question. And let us move on in these powerful days, stand with greater determination, and in these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be, we have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you.
And now is the time in our service where we take an offering. We know it's the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and gather. For those attending in person, we will pass the collection plate. Please use the envelope you'll find in the pew. Write your name and indicate if your offering is part of your pledge or if it's a donation. For those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate through the PayPal giving page on our website. Please give as generously as you can. Our offerings will be greatly received. And now for our offertory music, The Garden Song by John Denver.
Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, someone bless those seeds I sow. Someone warm them from below. comes tumbling down. Pulling weeds and picking stones, man is made of rings and bones. Feel the need to grow my own, 'cause the time is close at hand. Grain for grain, sun and rain, find my way in nature's chain, to my body and my brain, to the music from the land. Plant your rows straight and long, temper them with prayer and song. Mother Earth will make you strong if you give her love and care. Old crow watching hungrily from his perch in yonder tree. In my garden I'm as free as that feathered beak of air. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, someone bless the seeds I sow. Someone warm them from below till the rain comes tumbling down.
Please join us in singing hymn 399, Vine and Fig Tree, twice, in your gray hymnal. Please stand as you are able.
We're going to do first section repeat, second section repeats, go back to the first section. Okay.
Everyone needs a vine and fig tree, shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone needs a vine and fig tree, shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And everyone neath a vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid.
I want to thank our choir this morning for leading us in song, calling us into the moment. The scholar, writer, thinker, Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. has written, "We imagine what is possible as we decide to act in one way as opposed to another. And that imagining grounds our efforts to navigate the problematic situations we face. What we imagine allows us to act one way or another. This Sunday, in many ways, we imagine as we consider what the habits of gardening are. The gardening of our soul, the gardening of our communities, the gardening of our spiritual lives, even in winter even when it is snowy and slushy outside. I recall the creative artist Richard Blanco, who in his 2016 poem Election Year wrote, "You lose sleep tonight, uncertain if the garden is meant inevitably to survive or pass, or if it matters one way or the other, with or without your tending." Blanco continues, "Maybe it's not just the garden you worry about, but something we call hope, pitted against despair. Something we can only speak of by speaking to ourselves about flowers and weeds and hummingbirds and spiders and vines and fig trees and a garden tended under a constitution of stars we must believe in, displayed across our sky." So we gather this morning, wondering if our garden tools are up for the task, wondering if our garden even still exists under the snow, curious about our next actions, spiritually, personally, and in our civic life. Cloud said a phrase I've been thinking about a lot: imagination is an act of empathy. Imagination is an act of empathy and is central to, quote, a politics of tending, habits of concern that open us up to the wounds and joys of strangers, enables habit formation that affirms the dignity of our fellows, and encourages a willingness to embrace practices of listening and being still as critical features of democratic struggle. Echoing Dr. Glaude, Reverend Ashley Horan, who's one of the leaders of our national UU the Vote program, which is a nonpartisan voter outreach program, she asked 3 questions, and she keeps asking them. I've read some of her emails. She keeps coming back to these 3 questions. What is the shared moment we are in? What are the most urgent and important needs of this moment, which will be different next week and was different a week ago? And what is the moment calling us to do and become? And we are Unitarians. We are Unitarian Universalists in the garden that is New York State in 2025. And we are gathered in the lands of the Lenape people. We are one of 62 Unitarian and Universalist congregations, including a fledgling bilingual English-Spanish startup congregation in Sunset Park, all across New York State. Here in the city, there are 6 congregations in 3 of the 5 boroughs. There was one in Queens that closed, and there was one in the Bronx that is no longer operating. But we're here, and there are 2 established ones in Brooklyn, and that new one just forming, so those numbers are going to go up. In case people are interested in the Super Bowl, outside New York, there are 3 Unitarian congregations in Philadelphia and 1 in Kansas City. But in our state, there are communities of 18 members total and 737 members total, ranging in places from small villages far upstate to places that we could just get on a bus and be at maybe a half hour, 40 minutes. Reverend Dr. Paula Cole-Jones, who is a leader of anti-racism work in our movement, suggests that we think about our whole association as anchored in connecting communities of community. That each one of our congregations is a community, and within it, there are groups, there are choirs, there are social justice, there's worship, there are spiritual care circles, there are study groups. Each congregation has its own variety of communities within it. And each community of communities is in relationship with communities across the state they are in and the continent and beyond. She invites us to think about how we nurture communities in this moment of stress, how we tend the garden of the worship committee and the choir and the spiritual care circles, what habits of speaking, listening, engaging, and being present do we need to do to care for the health of the small groups that make all of our congregations, from those with 18 people to those with over 700, places of sanctuary, of holiness and protection. I've thought a lot about the words of Monica Dietrich, who's a Unitarian Universalist in Westchester, whose dream for our congregations are to be places that are soft landing and also a launch pad, a place to heal and a place to be inspired to go out. This Sunday, I want to lift up a few stories from 3 congregations across New York State. One not too far away is the First Unitarian Church of Brooklyn, in that other borough. And it was founded in 1833. Has 259 members. If you were to visit, it's in a stone Gothic building. If you walked by and didn't look at the sign, you might think it was a Catholic or Episcopal church. It's in Brooklyn Heights, just near downtown Brooklyn. Formerly called the Church of the Divine Paternity, First Unitarian is known for their second Jazz Sunday, featuring a choir and a jazz band. The deeply kind Reverend Micah Ma serves as their minister. Similar to our congregation, First Unitarian Brooklyn has a long history of anti-war activism, and most prominently, since the American War in Vietnam, a steady group of peace activists and a constant questioning of how do we serve our neighborhood? How do we get involved? One project that First Unitarian has organized for years is what they call a Share the Plate ministry. Every month, the congregation donates a portion of their undesignated offering to varied local and international nonprofits and community groups. Changes year to year. The team that organizes the Share the Plate comes up with a suggestion for each month. It's always approved by the board, but it gives opportunities for the congregation, just in the normal everyday practice of life, to form relationships with community groups, similar to how we do with our Compassion Preacher series. The organizations that have received support have ranged from a New York nonprofit called My Dog is My Home, which is a nonprofit based here in the city that argues for pet-friendly, affordable housing, to ANERA, American Near East Refugee Aid, which is dedicated to humanitarian support in Gaza, Lebanon, and Jordan. This past month, I found out the church in Brooklyn, they donated to a group called Undue Medical Debt New York City that buys and forgives medical debt taken on by those in New York City hospitals. And if you can believe it, over 100 million people in the United States have medical debt. So often because of unexpected illness or injury, and 55% of those with medical debt, according to Neighborhood Trust, have deferred needed medical care because of fear of unexpected bills. Reverend Micah shared that they raised for this nonprofit $1,500. $1,500, and that because of the mechanisms of debt collection, that will help relieve over $150,000 in medical debt for those in the city system. A testimony from a New Yorker who had her medical debt eliminated by undue medical debt, something that inspired the congregation's group to get involved. The letter said, "What a relief. I'm a single mom who had 2 surgeries back to back, and I'm trying hard to make ends meet. I was brought to tears by the kindness of this act. Before, I was literally praying and drowning in debt. Do I have to take out another loan? What am I going to do? This miracle is the best gift to receive in the new year. Thank you. I am forever grateful." Literal tears. Thank you. Signed MP from the Bronx. And Mike has said, one of the things that's so beautiful about a Share the Plate ministry is it's not radical, it's every day. It's thinking about what does the congregation, the gathered community do month to month, and how can that be a tool for living our values in the wider world. Another congregation, upstate in Westchester in the tiny village of Mohegan Lake, there is a small and mighty congregation of 41 members total, called the Fourth Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Westchester County. As you may guess, it is the Fourth Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Westchester County. Just near Peekskill, it was founded in 1957 in a small summer arts community with an early 20th century bohemian and anarchist heritage. The really dynamic Reverend Lane Cobb serves as their minister. Similar to us, this community of 41 is located in what is known as a purple political area, politically mixed community. But perhaps because it's purple, they are particularly committed to leaning into their witness for justice. And particularly, they focused on asylum and refugees. The Mohegan Lake congregation was founded by religious liberals just in the shadows of the McCarthy era. In a time of conformity and suspicion of dissent, this group formed to create a caring space for progressive religious families to support one another, and like our congregation, honor, love, and seek truth. They have a ministry of postcards. And what they have committed to do is, after their hospitality hour, they regularly organize parties to write letters and postcards to local and state elected officials. They can share a cup of coffee, donuts, and take some time to witness as a group. Because the joke is, well, if we let people take the postcards home, they won't sign them. Most recently, the congregation is committed and focused on supporting Afghan refugees, many of whom, all of whom under the new executive order have suspended entry to the United States. These are people who put trust in the words of the United States government and are in deep limbo, deep fear. The congregation is doing what it can to advocate with their local congressional officials to create a safe harbor for Afghani refugees. And then they contacted some of the people in their local interfaith group. And now suddenly, in northern Westchester, 6 more houses of worship are filling out these postcards, working with the nonprofit Open Arms for Refugees. You don't have to have 737 people to make a difference. The third congregation I want to talk about is the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. It is a historic congregation founded by spiritual activists known as transcendentalists who saw the divine in nature and the divine in every person. Based on last year's official count from the UUA, I know it's gone up, there is a community of 57 members with over 200 subscribers in our e-news, and I just learned this morning 1,500 followers on Instagram. Wow, that's a lot of people. The congregation has a long history of engaged civic life and global awareness, from Sunday school classes collecting money for Unitarian congregations in Hungary in the 1920s, to anti-war activism in the 60s and 70s in the face of the American war in Vietnam, to hosting Liberation Hanukkah services with Staten Island for Palestine now in the 2020s. 2 weeks ago, members, almost a dozen of this congregation, joined La Comena at the launch of an event called Bienvenido Staten Island, welcoming Staten Island, trying to create a culture on this island of welcome and resistance to forces of exclusion, fear, and division. And I wish she was here this morning, but Mary Hernandez, a member of our congregation, told the Staten Island Advance, Unitarian Universalism really stands for social justice and supporting the rights of the immigrant. We're living in times that can be very fearful, but we have faith in the goodness of humanity, in compassion, in the right of law to be upheld. What I remember most from being in that room at La Comena's headquarters was just being around so many people from different houses of worship, including our own, different civic and secular groups, who wanted to be in the same space, who wanted to learn and find out what practically can we do to be an ally, an advocate, and to protect our loved ones. I remember people standing up and letting elders get a seat. I remember people grabbing a chair to make sure little kids didn't have to stand and run around the whole time. I remember seeing people across race, class, and creed find a way to collaborate. And that event was in English and Spanish, and finding a way to push the boundary of what welcome looks like. For me, it's said that healing, transformation work, justice work is relational. And I think one of the powers that I've seen in this congregation are the relationships with communities, inviting people to be speakers, inviting groups to come and join in religious ritual, using our space as a site of reflection, creates echoing loud spaces of listening and silence and intentionality that are part of democratic struggle. When we contact one another, when we push our values out into the public, when we steward the gardens of our spiritual lives, we have an opportunity to offer testimony and to remind ourselves to look out for the traveler on the side of the road, to honor the spirit of life and the search for truth. Hak Jun Lee, who's a contemporary theologian, has said, and I've quoted this before, but it's important to hear again, in the Bible, major covenants were introduced at critical turning points of history. The promises of a people were introduced at turning points in history. In the ancient stories, after the flood, after the fall of the Tower of Babel, the departure from Egypt, the transition to kingship, the end of exile, and finally at the time of displacement, division, and exploitation under the Roman Empire. In other words, at least in the Jewish and Christian scriptures, covenant, the promises of a people, are not symbols of stability and status quo, but a mechanism of social reinvention and transformation that copes with a massive crisis. There is no normal. The world is always shifting, but the values are constant. And as people, we can hold on to those values and in dialogue discern, how are we called to be? Who will we show up with over the next few weeks? And perhaps in 6 months that answer might be different. But if we're present to the moment unfolding, the values will accompany us. Love will accompany us. The spirit of freedom and hope will accompany us. The choices we make, the imagination we have, helps create new possibilities and new realities. And there are stories beyond our 3 congregations we heard today. The First Unitarian Society of Westchester rebuilt their community after suffering 2 floods in 10 years that destroyed their 50-year home. The folks at Fourth Universalist in the city joined Mindful Rebels, which is a group that protests outside large investment firms that put a ton of money in fossil fuels, and they meditate as people are going in. Some people just walk by them. Some people are a little freaked out. Some people feel guilty. And it leads to conversations. What are you doing? Unitarian Universalists in Syracuse organized the Building Beloved Community Beyond the Binary Conference to create a safe and affirming space to find community with transgender, non-binary folks and our allies. A conference to gather, learn, and grow. Reverend Molly Hammerand in Syracuse said, moments like this, moments like February 2025 are, quote, precisely why we do the inclusion-centered work that we do at First UU. In many ways, our congregation has spent years investing in preparation for this fearful time, so we can meet the moment with resolve, with the conviction that trans people are sacred, holy, and deserve to live, survive, and thrive in this world. Dr. Glaude, whose words we heard at the beginning, said, "We do not need the prophet or the hero to show up at this moment. What we need is trust in ourselves. Trust in ourselves to be present with one another, with the stillness, with the relationships we have, to tend the gardens of our faith, even when they're covered with snow. We affirm that every person is inherently worthy. We are not the only ones who do, thank goodness. Let's abide by those values. Our siblings in faith, the Unitarians of Cape Town, South Africa, proclaim, "We nurture and embrace each other and the community at large as a basis for sustainability, love, and prosperity." These values define who we are as a community, but it is living these values that we confirm our commitment to each other. We do live in fearful times. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be grieving. And when those emotions come up, it's okay to reach out and connect, to find moments of stillness, to recenter in the holy, to be recommitted. And remember that there are dozens of communities just in our own tradition, in context similar to ours and different, trying to find the best way in their context to live out our values through Share the Plate ministries, through postcard ministries, through mindful rebel meditation groups, through showing up at a Friday night when we're asked and invited by our community peers, by creating space for rituals to honor the dead and work for the living. May we be attentive to that abiding love that invites us to care for the stranger on the side of the road, to care for the stranger, the feelings, the emotions that are lost in our hearts, and to be attentive to all that is around us, now and in the days ahead. May it be so.
And now, for our closing hymn, please join us in singing hymn number 95, "There is More Love Somewhere," in your gray hymnal. Please stand as you are able.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere.
invite you to join me in extinguishing our chalice. You can find the affirmation in our order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
The Reverend Petra Tomes, who's a thoughtful and clear-eyed colleague, she serves Garden City on Long Island, reminded me of a blessing on ministry. All our ministry, our service and our work, from Reverend John Burens, who was the 6th president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Blessed are those who yearn for deepening more than escape, who are not afraid to grow in spirit. Blessed are you who take seriously the bonds of community, who regularly join in celebration and learning, who come as much to minister as to be ministered unto. Blessed are you who bring your children, who invite your friends to come along, to join in fellowship, service, and learning. Blessed are those who support the faith and its work by regular, sustained, and generous giving, who give of themselves no less. Blessed are those who know the congregation is often imperfect, yet rather than harbor feelings of isolation, bring their concerns to the attention of others and work to repair. Blessed are those who, when asked to serve, do it, and who realize that change is brought about through human meeting, who do the work of committees, online and in person, and stay till the end. Blessed are those who speak their minds, who take and give criticism, who keep alive the sense of humor. Blessed are you who know that the work of the congregation, the work of the faith, the work of all houses of worship is the healing transformation of our society. Blessed are all those who have a vision of beloved community, transcending the present, who do not shrink from controversy, sacrifice, or change. Blessed are you indeed.
So ends our service.